Nowhere else, I think, will you find people getting so defensive as when you point out that the thing that they think is their safe space is not as safe as maybe they thought it was. And so, me going around and saying, actually, therapy as a practice, as a modality, has a history that is incredibly harmful. And we would be very naive to suspect that we have fully rid that system of its harms. Welcome to the Repatterning Podcast, where we believe your mind-body system is your domain and that choosing the beliefs, habits, and patterns that best support you is your birthright. I'm your host, Arden Leigh, creator of the Repatterning Project, an 8-week course in learning to free yourself from the patterns of your past and program your mind for your dreams of the future. Join me for these extraordinary conversations as we unpack the keys to creating our reality. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Repatterning Podcast. This is our final episode of Season 2, and I wanted to say thank you for listening along with us, being a part of this journey, tuning into these conversations. I hope that you have learned some useful things along the way. You have been inspired to tackle some things in your own lives, given what you've heard in these conversations. And I also, of course, wanted to mention that if you have been enjoying these discussions, you can come over and support this podcast on Patreon by going to patreon.com/the Repatterning Podcast. And for just $5 a month, you can also get access to our private Discord server where you can come join me and our producer, Tommy, and so many of our friends and students and course participants who are all on that same path of repatterning and using both Magick and personal development to improve our lives and get everything that we want out of this one precious life that we are living. I also want to let everyone know that the next round of the Repatterning Project, the 8-week course that inspires these discussions, is going to begin on September 13th. We're going through September 13th through November 11th, I believe, is our final graduation wrap-up call. And you can find all the details about this either on therepatterningproject.com, or you can find any of my social media, The Repatterning Project on Instagram and also on Facebook. And if you have any questions about the course, we can set up a call and we can set up some time to chat about it and see if it's the right path for you. But I know that for me and for so many of the past participants who have been through this course, this information, the complete 8-week download of the comprehensive map to our mind-body learning system, is the thing that has allowed them to make the big changes by seeing their own systems of learning and taking on beliefs and developing patterns, and the ability to go in and to change them, to rewire them, to install them, basically to give ourselves the patterns, beliefs, and mindsets that set us up to generate the external life that we want for ourselves. So whatever you desire, whatever your dream life is out there, there is a set of habits, beliefs, and patterns that supports you living that life. And it is absolutely within your domain. It is your birthright to be able to shape your mind-body system as you see fit, to become your favorite version of yourself and align yourself with the life of your dreams. So if that sounds like something that you'd like to do, go ahead and check it out. Reach out to me and we'll set up a time to chat. All right. So like we did with the last season, I'm taking this final episode of this season as well to be a solo episode where I talk a little bit about what's on my mind, some of the things that I've learned from this season, some of the things that I've learned on my own journey, and some of the things that I am the most passionate about. And the thing that is coming up for me personally, especially I would say, well, really within the past few years, but certainly it feels like it's very much at the forefront of my work right now, and something that I want to address and something that has been heavily on my mind lately. And that is the intersection of magic and mental health. I feel like this is a bit of an edge of a topic for me because historically, magic and mental health have not really seemed to go together. Even the phrase magical thinking is something that is often used to describe a symptom of mental illness or mental unwellness at the very least. And naturally, of course, then we also get into how the practice of magic itself has been persecuted throughout history. There is that idea of the witch wound, right? Of being someone who maybe even perhaps has either ancestral or past life memories of being persecuted for speaking out about magic, practicing magic, etc. And I actually don't even think it's that deep for me. I think actually for me, it is, I think it's much more, I think it's much simpler and I think it's much more directly related to this lifetime, which is simply that I have a very deep association with my safety and being understood. And that's difficult when we start to get into the territory of things that we cannot see, things that we cannot prove outside of the system in which we're viewing it, right? So if I want to know if a spell really got me a result, I can divine on that. But if you don't believe in magic, you're not going to believe my divination either. And growing up as a then undiagnosed autistic femme, I certainly made a lot of associations between my safety and being understood. I definitely have a pattern, even still within me, although naturally that is something that I can repattern, right? That is within my ability. And indeed, even in taping this episode, I am working toward that right now. But I definitely have historically had a pattern where I will opt to over explain things, hoping that if I just can connect all of the dots for someone and make it make sense, that they'll believe me, they'll understand, they'll see what I'm talking about, and then I will be safe because I will be believed, I will be accepted, I will be understood. My perspective, my point of view will be understood and hopefully validated. And that pattern is historically something that has been proven to be a misguided strategy. It turns out that actually over explaining to people who are often committed to misunderstanding you, whether for personal reasons or just simply because they are not open to expanding their own worldview to include something that they don't already yet understand, it doesn't work as well as I wish it did in my head. So, being someone who is a mental health facilitator and also has a magic practice is something that, even when I have seen it out there in the world, it's often separate. It's often kind of segregated, where someone will be like, okay, yes, I am a therapist or I am a counselor or mental health facilitator of some kind. And yet over here, I have my magic practice. And this is just something that I do in my own personal life. It helps me to ground myself spiritually, or it helps me, helps me just feel better, feel more connected or whatnot. The minute you get into the subject of using magic to facilitate mental health, I think a lot of people get a little judgy. Even people who are themselves magical practitioners, and even people who themselves are magical practitioners and mental health facilitators. And there's a lot of reasons why I think this is just completely illogical. There's a lot of reasons why I really believe that magic, if we look at it as a practice, and if we can at least admit that it is a practice that works, right? Not all the time, like anything, it's a system that it works when you use it correctly, but it's something that we can fail at like anything else, right? That's important for us to understand, because if we don't understand success versus failure in magic, we're not going to be able to track our own efficacy. And if we're working in facilitating mental health for ourselves or for others, it's really necessary to know when we're being effective, right? So understanding that magic is something that works and something that also can fail like any other system at times, but that it is something that we can learn and become better at. I look at that and I see a lot of people who are like, oh, but not when it comes to this. If you're trying to use magic when it comes to the outcome of mental health, then you're overstepping, or you're using the wrong thing, or nothing is a substitute for therapy or psychology and whatnot. And you guys probably know, if you've been watching the episodes up until this point, you guys probably know how I feel about the so-called infallibility that we tend to think of in terms of traditional therapeutics. We like to say, oh, just go to therapy. And yet there's been such an incredible, horrific history of harms within traditional therapeutics, passed down from institutionalizations, passed down from decades upon decades of stigma, passed down from exploitation, passed down from, ultimately really outdated and bigoted beliefs. It's like homosexuality used to be something that was in the DSM. Drapetomania is a word that means like essentially runaway slave syndrome, right? Like, oh, we took these people hostage, and because they tried to escape, they're therefore mentally ill, right? These are ways that any behaviors that fall outside of what we tend to think of as the societal norms get pathologized. And then people become persecuted for that. And yet we still have this attitude. There's this attitude that I encounter everywhere where it's just like this, oh, just go to therapy. You need therapy or you need psychology or whatnot. And it's something that I can't really unsee and unhear when I see it out there in the field. It's really been difficult for me because nowhere else, I think, will you find people getting so defensive as when you point out that the thing that they think is their safe space is not as safe as maybe they thought it was. And so, me going around and saying, actually, therapy, quote unquote, as a practice, as a modality, has a history that is incredibly harmful. And we would be very naive to suspect that we have fully rid that system of its harms. These are beliefs and thoughts and patterns and practices that have been passed down through generations. And as we've seen, for example, in the episode from season 1 with Katie Keach, and in the episode from season 1 with Dr. Jamie, and also from season 2 with Maya Salovitz, we've seen how this industry, and it is an industry, it is a for-profit industry. We have seen how this industry so often stigmatizes and pathologizes the very demographics that it claims to be treating, that it claims to be helping. We've seen how exploitation has taken place under the auspices of these institutions. And we've seen how those institutions are the very places that your average everyday therapist is going for training, for grad school, to learn how to help people. So for me, I look at it and I have a real hard time separating out the rot. And yeah, there are great therapists out there. Hey, I've had a few of them on this podcast, right? But they typically understand that this is something that is happening. They understand these forces that are at play, right? But there can be very well meaning people who genuinely get into this field because they want to help people who genuinely are passionate about mental health. The question is, does their compassion survive the indoctrination of their training? And so I feel like therapy gets held up on this pedestal of like, yes, Magick is great for all these things, but are you going to therapy? And I look at this and I'm just like, you guys, how are you not seeing this? Right. And meanwhile, there's this sort of belief that I've seen floating around where it's like, well, if you're using Magick, that's not enough. You need to go to therapy. And actually, I agree, I believe with much of the spirit of that comment. I believe that there absolutely is an issue, a pretty big issue, in the occult scene, in a lot of magical practitioners, where they feel like magic itself is a substitute for the inner work that therapy claims to be facilitating. It's sort of like, well, why do I need to work on myself if I just have magic, right? If I can just use magic to manipulate my external circumstances, then I'll just get everything I want. And I don't need to look inward. I don't need to look at my trauma. you know, that's not fun. That's not pleasant. Anything but that, right? Because so often the roots that really are at the bottom of our patterns that are leading us down misguided pathways or causing us to act in destructive manners They're those things that like none of us wants to touch. It's that gosh, was it Carl Jung? I might be wrong on this. Was it Carl Jung who said the cave you fear holds the treasure that you seek? I don't remember if it's actually Jung or not, but obviously that is a pretty popular expression. And yeah, I think that's how it is with trauma, with repatterning. The thing that we don't want to face within ourselves is actually where that key to our freedom lies. But we're like, oh no, don't look behind that door. So, absolutely, there are a lot of magical practitioners and occultists who will use magic as a way of trying to avoid that door, that cave. And they'll try to manipulate the world around them so that they don't have to look at themselves. And in that sense, I absolutely agree. Magic is no substitute for that inner work. But I've also seen it cross over to where, like I said, there seems to be this sort of segregation. All right, there's magic, there's your magic practice, there's this thing that you're doing, and sure, maybe it helps you feel spiritually connected, which adds to your sense of well being. But then there's your mental health that you have to work on over here outside the paradigm of magic. That's the only way people feel really safe talking about this, I think. So I think that's why it feels really edgy for me to bring this up on this particular episode. Because for myself and for others whom I have helped, when it really got to that sticking point, when it really came down to, I don't know how to move this, it was magic that did it. And that also doesn't mean magic that is aimed willy-nilly, magic that is aimed foolishly, magic that is aimed thoughtlessly or unconsciously or from an egoic drive, because that's not going to work. Right? That's just going to give us more of the same. But magic that is aimed truly and sincerely at self-transformation, at breaking through habits and patterns and beliefs and worldviews, magic that is aimed at becoming a better version of ourselves, magic that is aimed at aligning with our true will, magic that is aimed at cultivating self-awareness. That, for me, that has been the thing that actually broke through those points that I felt like this is impossible. This feels like such a block. This is a pattern, for example, that I know exists in me since I was pre-verbal. I don't have memory of what I am like without this pattern. When I have felt hopeless about that, when I have felt in total despair, magic was the thing that helped break me through that limitation when I could not do it for myself. Well, I guess technically I'm doing it for myself if I'm casting that magic, right? But I couldn't do it on my own. And this has also been true for others that I have also helped who were not able to be helped thus far in all the years of their life and all their years of seeking and trying different treatments, etc., by the standard mental health industry. There are so many people that the industry of mental health facilitation, therapy, traditional therapeutics, addiction treatment, there are so many people that those industries fail. And I've seen us kind of look at it in this way of, oh, well, addiction is a brain disease, which I disagree with, which is why I brought Maya Salovitz on to talk about addiction as a learning disorder. I guess if you want to think about neurodevelopmentally learned patterns as a brain disease, I mean, technically it is a dis-ease, an unease, an unwellness that is in the brain, but brain disease sounds so like final and formal. And I really think that it just reflects a bit of learned helplessness on the part of larger society. And no surprise there, because most people have not utilized magic to break past that point of very sincerely learned and experienced helplessness. If we don't know, as Maya Salovitz puts it in her own book, Unbroken Brain, she talks about something that I like to call the trapdoor paradigm. Basically, she says if someone is in a prison and by all appearances, that prison is securely locked, bars on the doors and windows, everything's locked up, and there seems to be no way out, then there really will seem to that prisoner to be no way out. But imagine there's a trap door there, right? And that prisoner's maybe been in there for 20 years and has never known that there was actually a trap door that would lead them out. And the irony about that too also is that sometimes if you bring up that there's a trap door there, sometimes people, because they're invested even unconsciously in an egoic identity where like they're a smart and intelligent person, right? And I certainly was like this as well, especially pre-repatterning. I definitely had that idea of like, no, like I'm smart, I'm intelligent. I would have figured it out by now. How dare you tell me that there, how dare you imply that there is a trap door in this prison because I've been here this whole time. And if there was one, I would have found it by now. And so it's funny how we can actually even resist sometimes the opportunities to change and transform a situation and escape from the prison of our own beliefs. Because what does it say about us if that was there the whole time and we did not avail ourselves of it, right? That is a threat to our egoic identity in that case. So it's really not anyone's fault that in many cases we're meeting these walls around things such as severe mental illness, around things such as chronic and persistent addiction that does not seem to have a solution to it. And I don't issue any blame to anybody regarding that. Certainly, growing up in the society that we grow up in and listening to, the things that we are supposed to do, quote unquote, right? Go to therapy, go to counseling, go to rehab, go to AA, go to all these pre-existing things. I don't blame us if we've tried or we've seen our loved ones try or whatever. We've tried all these things and they're not working. And then someone comes along and says, "Hey, why don't you do magic about it?" And our response is like, you've got to be fucking kidding me, right? This thing that probably most people don't even believe is real or gets results. This thing that so many people will just say, "Oh, well, I mean, I've had people say to me, on social media or things, I'll be in the middle of some, debate in the comments or whatever. And then they'll be like, "Oh, I took a look at your profile and I saw you read tarot. So now I know that I don't have to listen to anything that you say." Cool. It's funny how like learning a skill set in that person's mind, like my learning a skill set of divination, like actually in their eyes made me less intelligent. Like, are you saying so then like before I learned divination, you would have listened to me, but I add something to my skill set and now all of a sudden, and that's where that stigma against magic comes in, right? Even just like a week or two ago when I put out some ads on Facebook and Instagram for the combat and defense magic workshop that I was teaching. And I was talking in the description about how, hey, it is possible to suffer from magical attack, right? From spiritual attack. And here is a class that is going to teach you how to recognize those signs, how to fight back against it, how to protect yourself and your loved ones and the things that are important to you. And, sure enough, the comments come in about like, "Oh, I thought this was a joke," or "I thought this was like, whoa, back away slowly. This is a Delulu person who's talking here. Or this is just snake oil and whatever." And it sucks because it's like, no, I've been through magical attack. I have survived magical attack. And there were a lot of very valuable skill sets that I learned in fending that off. And here I am, sharing it with the people. So you bring up magic, and a lot of times people they'll just turn off. And so I feel like when you go and you try and tell someone who has dealt with severe mental illness or who has dealt with really stubborn patterns of addiction and you suggest magic, I feel like for a lot of folks that ends up falling under the same category of, "Oh, I'm depressed," or whatever. "Oh, well, did you try exercise, right? Did you try getting more sunshine?" Things like that that really feel hollow, that feel tone deaf. That is some of the existing preconceptions that I face when I begin to speak out about the kind of work that I have been doing. And to be clear, the repatterning project itself is not a course that teaches any magic. And maybe there's some people out there who maybe actually wish that it would, right? And if that's the case, we can absolutely talk about magic on the group calls and things like that. Like there is space for that for sure. But I specifically created this course to be accessible to people who don't believe in magic because there are many ways, both magical and mundane, to rewire the brain. So if the repatterning project is a course in understanding our mind body operating system, the way that our experiences and our traumas, capital T and lowercase t traumas, and all of the things that we go through in the world, the cultures that we're born into, the societies that we're born into, the way that our experiences and interactions with our peers shape us. Obviously, our parents, our major caregivers. And, really, there's nothing that happens to us that our mind body systems do not learn from in some capacity. We are always learning, we are always taking in information from all around the world in our experience through our five senses and processing that information in a way that helps us to make sense of our reality. And we learn, oh, we touch the hot stove and it's hot. We learn, open up to your crush and you get punched in the stomach if you're me, right? Things like that, right? If you're me in the second grade or whatever. And so it doesn't take an understanding or a practice of magic to understand how this works. This is based in mundane physical reality, the way that we take in this information through our five senses, the way that it is processed in the brain, the way that it is stored, and the way that our beliefs and worldviews form around that. I can teach that without talking about magic at all. And I do twice a year for 8 weeks. Next one starting on September 13th. So there's nothing about repatterning that requires a belief in magic. It all falls under the category of mundane, provable, like physical things happening in the world and in our brains and bodies. And there's lots of things that we can do that don't involve magic to shift those, right? We can, for example, we can decide we want to surround ourselves with different kinds of people. We can decide, like, hey, the worldviews and the beliefs that I'm taking on from the people around me are not really healthy. So I'm actually going to shake up my social circles a little bit and actively go look for people who are doing the kinds of things that I want to be doing, because I know I'm going to sort of osmose their beliefs and their worldviews by being around them. That's a completely mundane way that we can repattern. Or, for example, like repetition, right? The more we do something, whether we are repeating that behavior, such as practicing something, or whether we are using information in order to program our minds with the language that we use, right? Affirmations, or even just like changing our language, catching ourselves when we say something about the world that, we don't want to be true or whatever, right? Like, oh, all men are trash or whatever. Well, actually, I don't want that to be true because, I primarily date men. So that doesn't serve me. So how can I shift that, right? Hey, we are going through a time where the collective masculine and its toxic behaviors is coming up into the spotlight. Isn't this a wonderful opportunity for us to see which men in our reality align with our values and don't, right? Wow, there has never been a better time to be a person who primarily dates men. So there you go. Like there's an example of me like changing my language in a way that I did back around, 2016 when I first went on my journey of repatterning in a way that ended up shifting my own worldview, shifting me and my attitude, and also the things that I noticed in my reality, the things that I gave my energy to. So there's lots of ways that we can repattern ourselves that do not rely on magic whatsoever. So it's not inherently a magical course. However, there seems to be this disconnect where somehow even people who understand and believe that magic works for, say, I don't know, landing a job, drawing a lover, winning the lottery. That's a really hard one though, because everyone's trying for that one. So that's, people say that all the time. And it's like, well, good luck with that because you're competing with a lot of people who are doing magic over that. You might as well, actually do money drawing magic for building a business and being able to live a life doing things that you love, right? That's going to be a much more, everyone wants the quick fix, right? But people tend to think like, oh, yeah, magic is legitimate for these kind of earthly things, but somehow our mental health is just off the table. No, you don't do magic for mental health. You need to go to a therapist, right? You need to go to a therapist who is likely trained by an institution that was quite likely in cahoots with organizations that are causing harm to the very demographics that they claim to treat. And this really frustrates me, you know? So, this is why this has been pretty edgy for me to talk about, because I know that in some ways, I am opening myself up to attacks from all sides. I am opening myself up to attacks from people who just don't believe in magic and who think that I am just naturally being exploitative, that I'm being some sort of snake oil salesman, promising people an easier time with their mental health, just to take their money or whatever. And there's also going to be people on the magical side of things who are like, "Oh yeah, no, I know that magic works, but you shouldn't be doing that. That's not the same thing," or whatever. And again, it's not. Using magic is not the same as treating your mental health. But why do we then leap to the conclusion that we cannot use magic to treat our mental health, right? If magic works, and if we believe that magic is capable of landing us a job, drawing us a lover, getting us some shiny new car, getting people to stop talking gossip about us, right? All of these classic historical uses of magic, protection magic to keep us safe from unsafe people, road opening magic to remove obstacles to us getting the things that we want in life. If we're willing to say that all of those uses of magic are valid, then why would magic not be valid to use our mental health? That makes no sense to me. And yet there's this wall, there's this separation that says, no, you can't use it for that. That's not a legitimate use of magic. Or you're just trying to bypass the work on yourself by doing more magic and not doing this in the traditional way, which again, the traditional way has been pretty harmful for a lot of people, or at the very least, neglectful. Magic, on the other hand, can address the spaces that neglect leaves. It takes an average, a statistical average of 7 years in treatment for a person, a plural person, to receive a DID diagnosis, a diagnosis of dissociative identity disorder. You know what can shorten that time a whole lot? Magic. And the reason is that when you use magic, you are calling on assistance from spirits. You are calling on assistance from deities, saints, entities, spirits, whatever classification you want to categorize them under. And they can see a lot more than you. We talked about this also in the episode with Maja Dao when we talked about shadow work. The idea that using magic for shadow work is particularly effective because if shadow work is about being able to see the things that you currently can't see, the things that are beyond your conscious awareness, man, how do you see that, right? Well, magic is a great way to bridge that gap because the non corporeal beings who are working as your allies, they can see it. They can see it oftentimes a lot better than you can because they have that higher perspective. When we say, I am opening the roads to an outcome that I want, why on earth would we assume that we cannot open the roads to a complete understanding of our mental wellness? Why would we say that we cannot open our roads to the correct treatment that we need? And that's how I got what usually gets done in 7 years, done in under 6 months. And part of that was actually me making because I recorded a song because my voice for me personally is my strongest form of magic. That was me recording the Our Father in Portuguese. It's released under my solo project name Arden and the Wolves. So you can find it. It's called the Pai Nosu. And yeah, out on all music platforms. So shameless plug. And so at least half that time was spent in just the learning and the recording of that song. We can do with magic a lot of things a lot more quickly than the traditional therapeutic industry has historically been able to do. Another really great example, let's talk about how we can use magic specifically for repatterning, right? Let's say that there is a certain pattern or a belief or a worldview, and maybe we have actually identified this in ourselves. Perhaps we have come to an awareness around it. But again, maybe that pattern is pre verbal. Maybe that pattern is something that we have lived with our entire lives, and we can't even picture what we would be like without it, let alone try to step into the beliefs and behaviors that would free us from it. Well, that's again where magic can come in, because one of the things that can repattern us in our experiences, sometimes the most quickly, more quickly than something like repetition or something like joining a new peer group, although those are great things to do, something that can cause that sort of lightning path in the forest of our neural pathways, much in the same way that often an original trauma does, is something that we can call a corrective experience. Well, guess who can facilitate a corrective experience for you? Your spirits. Your spirits, when you go to them and you work magic cooperatively with them, they are orchestrating events for you in the external world. If you go and you do some job finding magic with your spirits and you say like, "Hey, I really want to, nail this interview or whatever." Well, they make sure that you get there on time and you look great that day, and the interviewer who's interviewing you that day happens to like you, and that you make a great impression, right? And all of these external events are being orchestrated on your behalf. So, what makes people think that magic is not indeed sometimes the best, the quickest, and the most obvious way to repattern ourselves? Because your spirits can literally orchestrate you an event that overwrites the original trauma. And I'm not going to lie, even as I'm saying this, I'm not saying that that event is necessarily going to be easy. I have seen corrective experiences orchestrated that were wildly effective, but deeply unpleasant in the moment. I have experienced those corrective experiences myself, but they did succeed in gaining that outcome. So again, the divide here is it's just wild to me. Why do we think that magic works for all these other things that we want, but somehow if we try to apply it to mental health, then all of a sudden, oh no, we don't touch that. There are so many reasons why, in working with our own mental health, we are aided by beings who can see and do more than we can. The fact that they can see what's going on that we can't see, the fact that they can open our roads to the experiences that we need, the fact that they can orchestrate events that will literally serve to repattern us through our experiences. Really deep things. Things like sexual traumas, that create certain affinities or certain like inability to experience intimacy. Those can be overwritten through corrective experiences. Corrective experiences are not necessarily inherently magical, but corrective experiences can be orchestrated by the spirits to whom you are petitioning your magic. Baby Reindeer, for those of you who saw that television show, is a really great example of a person who goes through a whole bunch of incredibly difficult and destructive, but ultimately corrective experiences to heal. It's been out a while, so I hope you'll forgive me if I spoil a little bit of Baby Reindeer for you. But something about that show that honestly sometimes brings tears to my eyes whenever I even talk about it is the fact that in that show, we're dealing with a main character who suffers sexual traumas from having made himself vulnerable to one of his heroes because he wants so badly to be a showrunner, to be a TV writer. And so he goes along with trying to please this person that he thinks holds the keys to that future for him. And he ends up exploited by that person in some really, really bad and traumatic ways. And the things that ensue from there, we see this character who has really, really poor self-worth, really poor boundaries that are typical of surviving sexual trauma of that nature that we learned throughout the show had happened to him. And this series of events unfolds that ends up being so completely destructive, but then ends up breaking down all of those walls or lies or everything that all the shame, that the trauma had built up in this person. And you don't actually see it in the TV show itself. But I always say, like, in order to get the complete experience of Baby Reindeer and how just incredible it is as a story, you need to watch the making of the series, which is, an additional bonus feature on Netflix, as though it were like the last episode. Because, of course, like the making of is like literally this is where I'm going to get teary about this. Like, this person goes through all of this trauma because in the beginning he wants to be a showrunner so bad, and he goes through all of these like horrible and destructive experiences, and in the end, like, what happens? He ends up making a TV show about them, and it's like the highest rated show on Netflix that entire year. Like, oh my gosh, it just like serves for me, like it just serves as such an amazing story to teach how going through, like, again, like Carl Jung says, no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots have reached down to hell, right? So you go through these horrible, awful experiences that shape you and that in some ways, like, not only condition you, but really like stand to break you almost. And then somehow through those series of experiences, all those walls and all that shame ends up falling away because you have no choice but to surrender, but to accept, the reality, the truth of what you've been through. And that ends up leading to being the key to your own freedom. And the fact that he took that story and he made like a top rated show out of it, which was his dream to begin with. I'm just like, that's it, right? It's what I live for. It's the ending I want to see for anyone who's been through trauma. But the middle is real messy, right? The middle, there's so many experiences in that show that are depicted that are just so like cringe, like, oh god, that's horrible that happened, right? So yeah, that's my way of warning everyone. Corrective experiences can be very messy, and we do want to be prepared. When we do magic, it will often show up in ways that can be quite messy and that can feel quite destructive. If you think of it like if you're getting to the root of a pattern, you can like dig with a shovel, right? You can have your friends join in and help you, dig with their shovels, like joining a new peer group or whatever. A corrective experience is often like using an explosive. And I don't want to sugarcoat how messy it can be. But for me, in my experiences, trusting in the original intention of my magic, trusting in the genius of my spirits to lead me through these experiences has never let me down. And it's a wild ride. Magic is a wild thing. I would not say that it is inherently dangerous, but it is not something that we can claim ever is fully under our control because it is a co creative process with beings who don't always have the same values, morals, or societal mores, shall we say, as we often like to take on, as we often take on whether we want to or not, right? In truth. And so it is unpredictable. And you can condition your magic for added safety. I certainly know that I myself had done that in the past with my own repatterning where I was really like, please, I can't deal with any more pain at this point. I am willing to put in the work. I am willing to, but please, 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 like I've had so much pain from my trauma already. I really need to do this in a way that is going to take care of my heart. And sure enough, they were like, okay, you promise you're going to do the work, but we will show you how to do it in a way that is going to be, I don't even want to say predictable. I wouldn't say it was predictable, but a bit more of a controlled path than having to learn through a bunch of destructive experiences. But I did need to put in that work and I did need to commit to that. But I did. So here we are. So yeah, it just baffles me that when magic can do these extraordinary things And that even when we are amongst practitioners who will fully admit that magic can do extraordinary things, that somehow there is this sense of stigma or dangerousness in actually using magic to facilitate our mental health. The other thing, too, is that a lot of our mental health symptoms, not all of them, but a lot of them also relate to spiritual illness. I have come across more than I ever expected to. I have come across more cases of spirit possession, of looking at symptoms that often get written off as psychosis, when in reality, there is a spiritual phenomenon at play. Sometimes that can be an actual spirit possession. Sometimes that can be plurality that crosses over into spiritual terrain. When we start talking about plurality, we're essentially talking about multiple consciousnesses in the same body. And we might as well just call them at that point multiple spirits in the same body. Did they originate within the consciousness that was born into that body, right? Or were there fragments that happened that allowed a sort of crack in the door whereby other spirits can also get in? I've seen all of the above. And so, oftentimes, where the boundaries of mental health treatment stops is actually right where much of the explanations for those spiritual illnesses, or even just spiritual experiences, even begin. I know of someone who is able to receive guidance and counsel through voices from external beings that they can hear quite clearly in their own mind. And bless their heart, when they tried to explain this to a traditional therapist or psychiatrist, they got put on antipsychotics because that person, that facilitator, did not have a framework in which such a thing was a legitimate experience. And that person did not do well on that medication. But when they were given a supportive atmosphere in which to learn about the voices that they were connecting with, to make those beings into allies, right? If you can, like, I'm not saying like there's some times where you're going to have negative or malefic entities that are not going to be your ally no matter what, right? But if it's merely a non corporeal being who is speaking to you, that you can hear clairaudiently, and if that being is benevolent and on your side, the support that is needed for wellness in that situation is not an antipsychotic drug. It's learning how to utilize that allyship in ways that are supportive of one's earthly life, right? I think about how 500 years ago in an indigenous society, right? Someone who would have been like an epileptic today. It's like, oh, that person has visions. What does he see? Are we going to have, a good harvest this season or whatnot, right? All the ways that we have pathologized very legitimate spiritual gifts into what we think somehow are expressions of mental illness. And sure, on the surface, sometimes it's difficult to tell the difference. A person who is in spiritual crisis, who is legitimately seeing and experiencing things, both externally and internally, can often appear the same as a person who's just having delusions. But for me, me and my very autistic brain, I need to understand and see the full picture. I need to get to the bottom of something. And just saying, like, oh, this person is delusional or this person is, psychotic or whatever, that's not a complete explanation for me. So, yeah, there's a lot of things that mental health facilitation tries to treat that are just simply out of its domain, that they don't have the framework for. And these things are things that are legitimate spiritual phenomena. And there's also, of course, possession by malefic entities. Between when we last aired the last season and beginning taping this season, I was actually partially possessed for about 5 days. And it was really interesting getting to see what that was. I mean, it was miserable, don't get me wrong. But the thing that helped me to go from 5 days of anxiety, sleeplessness, like barely being able to get more than 1 to 2 hours of sleep per night, and, anger, feelings of just real extraordinary feelings of both physical and emotional discomfort, anxiety. The thing that made a difference was going into the bath with some salt and saying some psalms. I felt immediately better after doing a psalm cleansing bath. Psalm 23, Psalm 51, and Psalm 91 for anyone who's curious, by the way. And I do them 3 times each. That's what put an end to those 5 days, right? Because actually, what was going on is I was under magical attack from a spirit who decided, for whatever reason, that they didn't like what I had going on. They were jealous of some things I had in my life, and, that they were going to attack me over this. Psalm bath, man. And I slept like a baby the following night. I don't know, man. Now, I'm not saying that a psalm bath is going to work for everything. There is certainly a lot of genuine mental illness. Although, how are we even defining mental illness? I will say this: I don't believe that a psalm bath would have been sufficient to repattern in me the patterns and beliefs and behaviors that I had that were causing my symptoms of anxiety before I went on my repatterning journey. So I'm not simplifying it in that way either. What I am saying is, for me as a facilitator, I am committed to getting to the bottom of the root issue of what is causing something. And for me, using magic to get that information, so far, that has never failed me. Eventually, right? As long as I'm not giving up and the client is not giving up, or I'm not giving up on myself, or I'm not giving up on my loved one, or whatever that looks like. So far, I have yet to come across a situation where magic has not ultimately worked. Eventually, again, magic fails plenty of times, but I'm very persistent. Sometimes it's taken quite a while to get there, but ultimately I was able to find that. And then the last consideration in using magic for our mental health and our mental wellness is that simply we live in a society, but especially right now, if you are living in the United States, we are living under really awful, in many cases, devastating economic conditions. We're living under systems of oppression. And magic historically has been used as a tool of the oppressed to fight back against said oppression. Even something like doing a money drawing spell, even something like building a business or a side hustle and then enchanting for that to be successful enough to sustain you. That is using magic to survive in conditions that are trying to oppress you because, we're run by a society of oligarchs and the wealth gap is just increasing and increasing, et cetera, right? Expenses are going up and pay rates are not. The average wage is not going up, but the prices are, things like that. And how can we possibly be so naive as to think that that doesn't affect our mental health? Throughout the past decade, I've seen so many articles and think pieces from therapists who are like, yeah, I just don't know what to tell people. People come into my office because they are depressed or they're anxious. And the truth is, they actually have genuine reasons to be anxious and depressed because of the way that the world is functioning or not functioning around them. And therapy can't address that. I mean, it can help us maybe to understand it better or to locate our own values in that or to decide like what we're going to do. But magic can help us attain resources. Magic can help us survive in trying times. Magic can help open us up to the people, places, and experiences that we need to be able to thrive. So it just boggles my mind that when I talk about mental health and I talk about facilitating mental health and I talk about things like repatterning, that somehow there is still this stigma around applying magic to that. But I'm at a point where it would be disrespectful to my own spirits, many of whom are magicians themselves, such as Hermes, trickster of the crossroads, and Hecate, triple goddess of the moon and mother of witches. And here these spirits have come forward not only to enact magic on behalf of the things I am asking of them, but also to teach me the magic of doing these things. And am I supposed to come on and say, oh, well, can't use magic on mental health? I would be lying. I would be doing myself a disservice. I would be doing a disservice to my spirits, and I would be doing a disservice to my audience. So it is edgy for me to talk about because, again, historically, I have associated my safety with feelings of being understood. And maybe that's why I'm taking an hour-long podcast episode to fully explain why I feel this way. But the truth is that over the past few years in particular, I faced some situations that called for me to become really adept at magic in ways that I was not before. And I have seen also gaps in the available education that I know I can fill. And so more and more, my work in the repatterning project, while again, that 8-week course does not in any way rely on a belief or a practice in magic in order to teach you everything that you need to know to do your own DIY repatterning. Even as that flagship course exists and will continue to exist as such, more and more and more, what I am being called to teach is geared toward magic. Again, I just mentioned, I just taught a combat and defense magic workshop because I went through a series of very severe magical attacks this past spring. And I felt very called to teach what I learned in defending myself from them because I hadn't seen that taught elsewhere to this extent or in this manner. So the more and more and more that I lean into teaching magic because I know, because I'm autistic, because when I learn something, when I learn and integrate something, my brain almost puts it into like a class shape or a course shape or a book shape or something like that. Because for me, part of my own integration is also being able to pass on what I've learned in a form that is organized and digestible. And so all of these new ways of thinking and of working with magic are looking to be birthed out of me in my work. And there is a part of me that is a little frightened of that because I'm like, oh gosh, but the repatterning project, what if people dismiss my work in mental health facilitation because my brand begins leaning rather heavily toward magic? And then I also think to myself, like, come on, Arden, like you are, you are literally the spiritual lineage heir of Grant Morrison, right? Like your magic it cannot be hidden at this. There's no going back into the broom closet for me at this point. And yet, if I wanted to, I'm sure it would be possible for me to say, oh, this is the mental health work that I do. And over here, I have my personal magic practice. And, it just helps me feel more spiritually connected. And I would be lying. I would be lying because when I have hit those walls, when I was in that prison cell, or when a loved one was in that prison cell, and we were looking for a trap door, and that trap door was nowhere to be found through any mundane means, it has been magic that revealed it to me. It has been magic that has led the way out. It has been magic that has taught me things about mental health that I never even conceived of before I went through those journeys. And magic brought me the information that I needed to know, introduced me to the people who could give me that information and serve as guides on this earthly side for the paths that I needed to take. It is magic that has orchestrated those corrective experiences in many cases that have led to those results. I would be paying an insult to magic itself if I pretended that anything else were true. So there we have it. That's pretty much everything that I wanted to say about that. Actually, I have one more plug. I have one more shameless plug, but it is related to this topic, which is that I have a new music project debuting on September 1st. So I believe that's just a few days from when this episode is going to air. It is appropriately called Planeswalkers. It's a music project between myself and my bandmate, Andrew Means, whom, if you follow industrial music at all, you may know of Andrew through projects such as Three Teeth and Patriarchy. And we have gotten together to create a project that is electronica, a little ambient, not ambient electronica, kind of innovative. I don't know. It's very difficult to describe. And our first EP drops on September 1st, and it is called The Mind Room. And it is a hyper sigil of, it's sort of like, it's meta magic, right? It's a story of using magic to break through one of those walls in mental health treatment. In this case, for someone who is a loved one, someone who's not. I don't think I would make an album about a client that would feel like about like a boundary issue. But for someone who was a loved one, and basically the story of working that magic toward a solution. And then the album itself, the EP itself, is a hyper sigil that's a sort of form of like another layer of magic that sits above this, basically, that says, I'm going to write the story through this album of, that all this magic worked and that this is a sustainable solution. So, so yeah. So if you're interested, even just like in my music, you can check that out. Again, the project is called Planeswalkers and the EP is called The Mind Room. And yeah, but it's relevant to everything that I'm speaking about here because, again, it is the story of using magic and using occult means to bring about resolution in mental health treatment and in treatment of addiction. So I hope you check that out. And then, of course, meanwhile, if the things that I am saying are resonating with you, if you feel like the things that I'm saying are making sense and may even be able to provide the solution that maybe you didn't know that you needed, the way past those walls that you're running into in your own mental health journey, then again, the next round of the Repatterning Project starts on September 13th. Reach out to me if you do want to have a chat about that. I'm happy to answer folks' questions. And hopefully, these episodes have also, I hope, served to share a little bit about my own values and my own practices that I bring into that container. So if it's resonating, you'll probably know. And and feel free to reach out. So yeah, I just want to conclude this episode by saying wholeheartedly, with my full chest, as scary as that may be, that I reject the premise that we cannot or should not use magic to achieve not just our mental health and mental wellness, but indeed our self-actualization, our becoming our favorite versions of ourselves. And mental health is obviously an important step along the pathway to that destination. So this was an exercise in me being a little brave today. But yeah, hopefully I've been able to shed some light on some things and maybe invite a few folks out there to consider whether they may have held some unconscious biases that actually did not stand up to the light of reason. Thank you again for being present with me on this second season of the Repatterning Podcast. Again, you can support that work at patreon.com/the Repatterning Podcast for a pledge of $5 a month. That will get you access to our private Discord server where we love to chat about these topics. Come down and join some of us and our graduates, chat about the things that inspire you. And we hope that community is of service. In the meantime, we will be taking another hiatus and we will be back in 2027 with more episodes for you. In the meantime, if you've been following along on Instagram, instagram.com/the Repatterning Project, I'll still be posting plenty of reels there and plenty of content. Please do feel free to stay connected. Find me on all the socials, find me in all the channels, and stay connected until we are back next season. And of course, go forth and repattern. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Repatterning Podcast. If you're curious about the Repatterning Project, the 8-week course in mental mastery and creative freedom that inspires these conversations, you can check out more details at therepatterningproject.com. We run a cohort twice a year, or you can download the self-study version of the course and get started today. We also offer a 4-week course on narrative magic and archetype titled Myths and Magic, Changing Your Life Through Story, also twice a year. If you'd like to join our community, the Repatterning Parlor, on Discord, you can sign up for $5 a month at patreon.com/the Repatterning Podcast. Thanks to everyone who makes the Repatterning Podcast possible. Firstly, our award-winning producer, Tommy Trembath of the Keymaster Collective network of podcasts. She also produces Transcending Comics, Vision in the Void, and Giant-Sized Violence. Thanks also to animation studio Mortis and Madriax, who created the video for our introduction, as well as to Andrew Means, who composed and produced our theme music. And also thanks to Al Alvarez, who took the photos of yours truly that you see on the cover of each episode if you're watching the video version. And finally, thanks to you, our listeners, who give meaning to this work. Our greatest wish is that whatever you've heard today inspires you to live freely and begin creating your reality from the inside out. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon.
Reaching for a hand to hold. Run your cities full of sirens. When the past is past, you can breathe at last again. Shadows of your tyrants. Built to last night.